My name is Olivia Bennett, and I was 23 years old when my family stole my daughter. Not kidnapped, not hidden, stolen legally. They sat in a courtroom, looked a judge in the eye, and convinced the world that I was an unfit mother. I lost everything that day. But what they didn't know was that every lie leaves a trail, and for 7 years, I followed every single one. Before we get into this story, if you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to love you, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Stories like this remind us that sometimes justice takes time. But when it finally arrives, it hits harder than anyone expects. Now let me tell you how my family took my baby away, and how I made sure they regretted it. The day my daughter Emma was born should have been the happiest day of my life. Instead, it was the beginning of a nightmare. I remember lying in that hospital bed, exhausted and shaking after 16 hours of labor. The room smelled like disinfectant and warm blankets. Machines hummed softly around me. Then they placed Emma in my arms. Tiny, pink, perfect. Her little fingers wrapped around mine. I cried immediately. Not the graceful movie kind of crying, the ugly kind. The kind where your whole chest shakes because you've never loved something so much in your entire life. At that moment, I promised her something. I whispered it into her tiny ear. I'll always protect you. I meant it. God, I meant it. But I had no idea who I needed to protect her from, because the people who would eventually tear us apart were standing right outside that hospital room holding balloons. My family, my mother, Patricia, my older sister Rachel, and Rachel's husband Mark. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs. At the time, I was too exhausted and too happy to notice. My mother had always controlled everything. Every conversation, every holiday, every family decision. Growing up, her approval felt like oxygen. When she was happy with you, life was peaceful. When she wasn't, you suffered. Rachel learned that lesson early. She became exactly who Mom wanted. Perfect grades, perfect clothes, perfect marriage, perfect house, perfect image. I was different. I asked questions. I challenged things. I moved out young. I made mistakes. And because of that, I became the family disappointment, the difficult daughter, the irresponsible one. The label followed me everywhere, even after Emma was born, especially after Emma was born. Emma's father wasn't in the picture. He left during my pregnancy. I won't pretend that wasn't devastating. It was. But I had a stable apartment, a decent job. I paid my bills. I loved my daughter. That should have been enough. Apparently, it wasn't. 3 months after Emma was born, the comments started. At first, they sounded innocent, concerned, helpful. Manipulative people are experts at disguising poison as kindness. Mom would come over and look around my apartment. You look tired. I was a new mother. Of course I looked tired. Then she'd sigh dramatically. I'm just worried about Emma. Rachel would visit and notice a few dishes in the sink. You know babies need clean environments. Mark would chime in. She's probably overwhelmed. Always said with fake sympathy. Always said like I wasn't sitting right there. I started feeling like I was constantly being evaluated, judged, examined. Every parenting decision became evidence against me. Formula or breastfeeding, sleep schedules, doctor appointments, daycare options. Nothing was ever right. Nothing was ever enough. One afternoon, I walked into my mother's kitchen and froze. Rachel was holding Emma. My mother was smiling, and I heard Rachel say something that made my stomach drop. She already feels like my daughter. The room went silent. Mom immediately looked away. Rachel laughed nervously. Oh my God, Olivia. It was a joke. But it didn't feel like a joke. Something cold crawled up my spine, the kind of feeling you get right before a storm. I should have listened to it. Instead, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Then, everything started happening at once. My job downsized. I lost hours. Money got tight. Very tight. I picked up temporary work. Worked nights when I could. Slept whenever Emma slept. I was exhausted. Desperate. Trying to survive. And that's when my family made their move. I didn't know it then, but they'd been documenting everything, taking photos, saving messages, building a narrative, not the truth. A story. A story about a reckless young mother who couldn't care for her child. The first time I realized something was seriously wrong happened during a family dinner. Mom suddenly asked me if I'd been drinking. I stared at her. No. She exchanged a look with Rachel. That look lasted less than a second. But I caught it. The secret look. The rehearsed look. The look people share when they've already discussed something beforehand. My stomach twisted. A week later, Child Protective Services knocked on my door. I'll never forget that moment. Emma was sleeping. Rain tapped against the windows. I opened the door and saw two strangers holding clipboards. I genuinely thought there had been some mistake. There wasn't. Someone had reported concerns, neglect, unsafe living conditions, substance abuse. I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. The accusations were absurd, completely false. But that didn't matter. Because once a report exists, it exists. And suddenly I had investigators asking questions, inspecting my apartment, reviewing records, looking at me like I was already guilty. I passed every inspection, every single one. But the damage had begun. The stress consumed me. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, started second-guessing everything. And that's exactly what my family wanted. A few months later, Rachel made her real move. She filed for emergency guardianship, claiming Emma was at risk, claiming I was unstable, claiming she was acting in the child's best interests. I remember reading the paperwork. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold the pages. It felt unreal, like someone had written a horror story using my life. The evidence attached was devastating. Photos, statements, witness accounts. Every piece carefully curated, every context removed, every weakness magnified. And worst of all, my mother supported her. The woman who raised me, the woman who held my hand when Emma was born. She testified against me. I can still see her sitting in that courtroom, avoiding my eyes, speaking calmly, speaking confidently, lying. The betrayal physically hurt, like being stabbed somewhere beneath my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone they were lying. Instead, I sat there trembling, watching my own family dismantle my life, one sentence at a time. Then came the ruling. Temporary custody. Rachel. Not me. Rachel. I heard the words but couldn't process them. The courtroom blurred. My ears rang. People stood. Papers shuffled. Voices echoed. And somewhere in that chaos, my daughter was taken from my arms. Emma started crying. I started crying. I reached for her. She reached for me. And then she was gone. The last thing I saw was her tiny hand stretched toward me, the same tiny hand that once wrapped around my finger in the hospital. I drove home alone. The apartment felt hollow, silent, wrong. Her toys were still there. Her blanket. Her bottles. Everything remained exactly where she'd left it. Except her. That night, I sat on the floor of her bedroom until sunrise, and for the first time in my life, I understood what true hatred felt like. Not anger, not resentment. Hatred. The cold kind, the patient kind, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that waits. Because deep down, beneath all the grief and shock, a thought had begun forming. A terrible thought. A dangerous thought. What if this wasn't about protecting Emma? What if they wanted her? And if that was true, how far had they already gone? I wouldn't get my answer until nearly a year later, and when I finally did, I realized the conspiracy against me had started long before I ever stepped into that courtroom. The answer came from a drunk man at a barbecue. Not a lawyer, not a judge, not an investigator. A drunk man who thought I already knew. By the time it happened, 11 months had passed since I'd lost custody of Emma. 11 months. 334 days. Not that I was counting. I absolutely was. Every morning I woke up and did the math automatically. Every birthday milestone, every holiday, every first word I wasn't there to hear. Every scraped knee I couldn't kiss. Every nightmare I couldn't comfort. People talk about losing a child like it's a single event. It isn't. It's 1,000 separate losses, over and over again, every day. I was allowed supervised visitation twice a month. 2 hours. 2 miserable, humiliating hours. Imagine being forced to schedule time with your own child like you're visiting an inmate. Imagine a stranger sitting in the corner of the room taking notes while you play with your daughter. Imagine knowing that every word you say is being evaluated. That's what my life became. The visitation center smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. Plastic toys, artificial smiles, fluorescent lighting. Everything felt fake. Everything felt temporary. The worst part wasn't seeing Emma. The worst part was leaving. Every single time. At first, she'd cry when I left. She'd cling to me, reach for me, call for me. That hurt. Then she stopped crying, and somehow that hurt even more. Children adapt. They have to. It's how they survive. But watching your child adapt to life without you feels like watching a piece of your soul die. One visit stands out more than the others. Emma was almost 2. She was sitting on my lap coloring, completely focused, tongue sticking out slightly the way kids do when they're concentrating. Then she looked up, smiled, and asked a question. A simple question. One sentence. One innocent sentence. The sentence that kept me awake for months. Why don't you live with us? I couldn't breathe. For a second, I genuinely couldn't breathe. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might pass out. How do you explain family betrayal to a toddler? How do you explain court systems? Manipulation? Lies? You don't. You smile. You swallow your pain. And you lie. Because the truth would only hurt them. Mommy's working really hard right now. Emma nodded, accepted the answer immediately. Kids do that. They trust you. She went back to coloring. Meanwhile, I spent the rest of the visit fighting tears. That night, I cried so hard I threw up. Then I got up the next morning and went to work. Because what else was I supposed to do? The court system wasn't interested in emotions. It wanted stability. Documentation, evidence, money, especially money. Lawyers aren't cheap. Appeals aren't cheap. Investigations aren't cheap. Everything cost money. Money I didn't have. So I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Waitressing, data entry, retail, anything, everything. I barely slept. My apartment became little more than a place to shower and collapse. Friends slowly disappeared. Relationships died. My entire identity narrowed into one purpose: get Emma back. Nothing else mattered. Then came the barbecue. A stupid neighborhood barbecue hosted by one of Rachel's friends. I almost didn't go, but a mutual acquaintance insisted. You need to get out of the house. I hated that phrase. People always said it like sunshine could cure trauma. Still, I went. Big mistake. Or maybe the best decision of my life. Depends how you look at it. I spent most of the evening avoiding people. Then around sunset, I ended up standing near the drinks table. That's where I met Greg, Rachel's husband's coworker. Nice enough guy. Very drunk. The kind of drunk where people think they're whispering, but actually everyone can hear them. We chatted for a few minutes. Then he laughed and said something strange, something casual, something that changed everything. You know, it's crazy how long Rachel wanted that kid. I froze. What? Greg blinked, immediately realizing he'd said something wrong. You know. No, I don't know. The color drained from his face. I felt my pulse quicken. What do you mean? He shifted awkwardly, looked around, suddenly sober. Nothing. What do you mean she wanted that kid? His silence told me everything, but eventually I got more. Much more. Not that night. That night he escaped. But the seed had been planted, and once planted, I couldn't let it go. Over the following weeks, I dug. Carefully. Patiently. I reached out to old acquaintances, former co-workers, friends of friends, anyone connected to Rachel. Most people didn't know anything. Some refused to talk. But eventually patterns emerged. Comments, conversations, stories, little fragments, pieces of a puzzle. Apparently Rachel had struggled with infertility for years. I knew that. Everyone did. What I didn't know was how obsessed she'd become. How bitter. How desperate. People remembered things. Things she'd said. Jokes that weren't really jokes. Comments she'd made while I was pregnant. I'd raise that baby if Olivia couldn't. Some people don't deserve children. At least I'd give her a stable home. At first, people brushed those comments off. In hindsight, not so much. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. I learned Rachel had consulted attorneys months before the custody battle began. Months. Before. That meant she'd been planning, preparing, strategizing, while pretending to support me, while attending baby showers, while holding Emma, while smiling in family photos. The realization made my skin crawl. This wasn't opportunistic, it wasn't impulsive, it was premeditated. The custody case hadn't been the beginning, it had been the final stage, the execution. I brought my findings to my lawyer. He listened carefully, then sighed. The sigh devastated me, because I already knew what it meant. It's suspicious, he admitted. But suspicion isn't evidence. I hated hearing those words. Evidence, evidence, evidence. Everything came back to evidence. I felt trapped inside a maze where every exit required proof, and every proof had been carefully hidden. The next few years became a blur. A painful, exhausting blur. Court motions, rejected appeals, new evaluations, more legal fees, more waiting, always waiting. Life moved forward for everyone else. Rachel posted family photos online, matching Christmas pajamas, birthday parties, school events, smiling pictures with Emma, my daughter. Each post felt like a knife twisting deeper. The comments were even worse. You have such a beautiful family. You were meant to be her mom. That one nearly broke me. I stared at that comment for 20 minutes. You were meant to be her mom. Thousands of strangers agreeing, celebrating, applauding. Because they only knew the story Rachel wanted them to know. Not the truth. Never the truth. One night, after seeing yet another family photo, I punched a hole through my apartment wall. The moment shocked me. I wasn't violent. I never had been. But the rage had nowhere to go. Years of grief. Years of helplessness. Years of watching thieves play house with my child. I slid down the wall afterward and just sat there, staring at the damage, breathing hard, hands bleeding. Something inside me had changed. Until then, I'd been fighting emotionally, trying to prove I was a good mother, trying to convince people, trying to appeal to fairness. That night, I finally accepted something. Fairness wasn't coming. Truth wasn't enough. I needed proof. Real proof. The kind that destroyed people. the kind that survived scrutiny, the kind nobody could explain away. And if I wanted it, I was going to have to find it myself. So I started treating my life differently, like an investigation. Every interaction became data. Every conversation became evidence. I documented everything: dates, times, witnesses, screenshots, records, patterns. I built folders, spreadsheets, archives, thousands upon thousands of pages. Obsessive? Absolutely. Necessary? Also, yes. Because slowly, very slowly, cracks started appearing. Tiny inconsistencies, tiny lies, tiny mistakes. Rachel wasn't as careful as she thought she was. Neither was my mother. Neither was Mark. And the more comfortable they became, the sloppier they got. The first major crack appeared when Emma turned 6. I received a frantic call from an old family friend named Susan. She sounded terrified, like she'd been holding something inside for years, and finally couldn't carry it anymore. "Olivia," her voice shook. "I think I need to tell you something." I sat upright immediately. "What is it?" There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "Your mother paid someone." My heart stopped. "What?" Before the custody hearing. I felt dizzy. Susan started crying, actually crying. The guilt had clearly been eating her alive. I heard them talking. Who? Patricia and Rachel. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. What did they say? Another silence. Then words I will never forget. They paid someone to make the report. Everything inside me went cold. Not hot. Cold. The kind of cold that comes right before revenge. The kind that arrives when a theory becomes reality. For years I'd suspected a conspiracy. For years I'd wondered. Now someone was telling me outright. The investigation against me may have been manufactured from the very beginning, and if that was true, then the entire custody case rested on a lie that stole 7 years of my daughter's life, a lie that stole 7 years of mine. That phone call lasted 43 minutes. By the end of it, I knew 2 things. First, my family had secrets. Second, those secrets were finally starting to surface. And once they did, nothing would ever be the same again. Because for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't the one losing ground anymore. They were. And they had absolutely no idea what was coming. I didn't sleep the night Susan called, not even for a minute. I sat at my kitchen table until sunrise with a notebook open in front of me. The same notebook I'd been filling for years, page after page, dates, names, court records, statements, contradictions, questions. The notebook had started as a coping mechanism, a way to stay sane. Now it felt like something else, a weapon. Outside, the sky slowly turned from black to gray. Birds began chirping. Cars rolled through the parking lot below. The world was waking up. But I had never felt more awake in my life, because for the first time in 7 years I had something new, not proof, not yet, but a direction. And after years of running into dead ends, a direction felt like oxygen. I replayed Susan's words over and over. Your mother paid someone. They paid someone to make the report. If that was true, then the original CPS investigation wasn't triggered by genuine concern. It was manufactured, created, engineered. And if someone had accepted money, there had to be a trail. People always leave trails. The problem is that most people stop looking too soon. I didn't. I couldn't. Because Emma was almost 7 years old now. 7. The realization hurt every time I thought about it. 7 years of birthdays. 7 years of Christmas mornings. 7 years of bedtime stories. Gone. You don't get these years back. Even if justice wins. Even if the truth comes out. Even if every guilty person suffers, time remains stolen. And that knowledge fueled me. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Not the lawyer who handled my original custody case. That man had long since given up. No, this was someone different. A woman named Denise Harper. The kind of attorney who never smiled unless there was a reason. Sharp eyes, sharp mind, sharp tongue. The first time we'd met, she'd looked at my case file for 20 minutes before saying something nobody else had ever said. I believe you. 3 words. 3 simple words. I nearly cried hearing them. Now I sat across from her in her office, telling her everything Susan had revealed. Denise listened carefully, then folded her hands. If this is true, she said quietly, this changes everything. My pulse quickened. But there needs to be evidence. Of course there did. Evidence. Always evidence. I almost laughed. The word had haunted me for years. Denise leaned forward. If someone accepted payment, money moved somewhere. I nodded. If money moved, records may exist. I nodded again. If records exist, her eyes narrowed. We find them. For the first time in years, hope felt real. Not comforting hope, not optimistic hope, dangerous hope, the kind that makes powerful people nervous. The following months became the most intense period of my life. Every spare second went into the investigation, every resource, every connection, every opportunity. I tracked down former employees, former neighbors, former family friends, anyone who had been around during that period. Some remembered nothing. Some refused to talk. But some talked. One person led to another, then another, then another. Tiny fragments slowly formed a picture. The picture wasn't complete, but it was enough to reveal something disturbing. My mother hadn't acted alone. Rachel hadn't acted alone. There were more people involved. People I'd never suspected. One evening, Denise called me. Her voice sounded different, controlled, excited. Sit down. Immediately, my heart started pounding. What happened? I found something. The words hit me like electricity. What? A bank transfer. I stopped breathing. Silence stretched between us. What kind of transfer? Denise exhaled slowly. The kind that shouldn't exist. I gripped the phone tighter. A payment. Made shortly before the original CPS complaint. Sent through an account connected to one of my mother's business holdings. The recipient? A relative of someone connected to the complaint process. Not direct enough to prove corruption by itself, but suspicious enough to raise serious questions. My entire body shook. After 7 years. 7 years. We finally had something tangible, something real, something they couldn't dismiss as emotion. I sat on my couch staring at the wall for nearly an hour afterward. Not crying, not smiling, just processing. Because suddenly the nightmare I'd been living wasn't paranoia anymore. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't grief distorting reality. It was real. Every horrifying suspicion, every gut feeling, every sleepless night. Real. I thought I'd feel victorious. Instead, I felt angry. Angrier than ever. Because knowing the truth doesn't erase the damage. It magnifies it. Now I knew exactly how deliberate it had all been. Exactly how calculated. Exactly how cruel. The next breakthrough came 6 months later, and this one nearly destroyed them. A former employee from my mother's accounting firm reached out anonymously. At first, I assumed it was nonsense. People send fake tips all the time, especially in messy family disputes. But then documents started arriving. Real documents. Internal records, emails, financial statements. The deeper Denise examined them, the quieter she became. Which was never a good sign. One afternoon, she invited me to her office. No details, no explanation. Just come in. Immediately. When I arrived, several folders sat on the conference table. Denise looked almost stunned. That scared me more than anything, because Denise never looked stunned. Ever. What is it? She slid a document across the table. I read it once, then twice, then a third time. My vision blurred. It was Rachel. Years earlier, discussing legal strategies. Not after the custody dispute began. Before. Long before. In one email, she described me as an obstacle. An obstacle. Not a sister. Not family. An obstacle. Another email outlined concerns about my financial situation during pregnancy. Another discussed potential custody pathways. Another referenced documentation, evidence gathering, witness preparation. My stomach twisted. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was confirmation. Confirmation that my daughter's removal had been planned while I was still carrying her, while I was buying baby clothes, while I was decorating a nursery, while I was imagining our future. My own family was strategizing how to take her. The room felt colder, smaller, harder to breathe in. Denise broke the silence. This may establish intent. Intent. One word. One devastating word. Intent meant planning. Intent meant conspiracy. Intent meant motive. Intent meant they weren't concerned relatives acting in good faith. They were participants. Active participants. I looked down at the papers again, and something inside me shifted. For years I'd been driven by pain. Pain is powerful, but it burns out. What replaced it was something stronger. Purpose. Cold. Focused. Precise. Purpose. Because now I knew exactly what I wanted. I didn't want them embarrassed. I didn't want them uncomfortable. I didn't even want them apologizing. I wanted the truth exposed publicly. Completely. Irrefutably. I wanted every lie dragged into sunlight. I wanted every reputation built on deception reduced to rubble. I wanted the world to see them exactly as they were. Nothing more, nothing less. The legal strategy took another year. A full year. People imagine revenge as dramatic, fast, explosive. Real revenge is paperwork, meetings, research, waiting, patience, endless patience. The hardest part was keeping quiet, because during that year, Rachel remained blissfully confident. She continued posting family photos, continued presenting herself as a devoted mother, continued attending school events, charity functions, community gatherings. People adored her, absolutely adored her. She had become a local success story, the woman who saved her niece, the woman who stepped up, the woman who did the right thing. Every compliment made me sick, because I knew what they didn't. I knew the foundation beneath that reputation was rotten, and eventually rotten foundations collapse. Then came the final piece. The piece that transformed a strong case into a devastating one, an audio recording. Accidental. Unplanned. Catastrophic. One of the people involved had recorded a conversation years earlier. Nobody remembered it existed, until it resurfaced. The recording wasn't perfect, but parts were crystal clear. Crystal clear. I listened to it 3 times, then 5, then 10. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Because there was my mother's voice, Patricia Bennett, calm, confident, discussing how they needed to protect the narrative, not Emma. The narrative. The narrative. One phrase destroyed years of lies, because innocent people don't talk that way. They don't discuss narratives. They discuss children, safety, truth. My mother discussed optics, image, perception, control. The mask finally slipped, and once it slipped, everything started moving. Fast. Very fast. Court filings, emergency motions, investigations, media inquiries, witness interviews, subpoenas. The machine that had once crushed me was now turning toward them. I remember receiving the official hearing date. I stared at the paper for a long time. My hands felt strangely steady, my breathing calm, my thoughts clear. After 7 years. The moment had arrived. The truth was finally going to be tested, publicly, and if everything went the way Denise believed it would, my family wasn't just facing embarrassment, they were facing ruin. The kind of ruin they spent decades convincing themselves could never happen to them. But as the hearing approached, one question haunted me, one question more important than courts, more important than revenge, more important than justice. Emma. She was almost 11 now, old enough to understand, old enough to remember, old enough to ask questions. What would happen when she learned the truth? Would she hate me? Would she believe me? Would she feel betrayed? Or worse, would she realize her entire childhood had been built on lies? That question terrified me more than any courtroom, because I could survive losing again. I had done it before. But losing Emma's trust? That was the one thing I wasn't sure I could survive. And soon, I would find out. Because the hearing that would expose my family was only weeks away, and none of us were prepared for what was about to happen. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I remember every detail: the weather, the drive, the knot in my stomach, the way my hands trembled when I parked outside the courthouse. 7 years. 7 years of waiting had led to that building, that room, that day. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes before going inside. Not because I was scared of losing. Oddly enough, I wasn't. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt prepared. What scared me was what winning would cost. Truth changes people, sometimes permanently, and by the end of that day, several lives were going to shatter, including Emma's. The courthouse looked exactly the same as it had 7 years earlier. Same stone steps, same metal detectors, same sterile hallways. But I wasn't the same woman, not even close. The Olivia who had walked into that building at 23 years old had been exhausted, frightened, and desperate for people to tell the truth. The woman walking in now was 30, experienced, focused, and carrying enough evidence to burn entire reputations to the ground. Denise met me near the courtroom entrance. She handed me a bottle of water. Ready? I looked through the small glass window in the door. Rachel was already inside. So was my mother. Mark sat beside them. The sight hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I didn't see enemies. I saw family. The people who used to sit around Thanksgiving tables. The people who knew my favorite childhood memories. The people who watched me grow up. The people who should have protected me. Then Rachel looked up. Our eyes met. And I remembered everything. Emma reaching for me. The supervised visits. The birthdays I missed. The lies. The manipulation. The years stolen. Any hesitation disappeared. I opened the door and walked in. The hearing lasted 9 hours. 9 hours that felt like 9 years. At first, Rachel looked confident, almost bored, like she expected another routine legal proceeding. My mother looked calm, collected, controlled. She'd always been good at appearances. Mark seemed slightly nervous, but nothing unusual, nothing alarming. That changed quickly. The first major shift happened when financial records were introduced. I watched Rachel's face carefully. The confidence vanished first, then confusion, then concern, then panic. Tiny changes, tiny cracks, but unmistakable. People think panic looks dramatic. Usually it doesn't. Usually it looks like someone blinking too much, swallowing harder, adjusting their posture, looking toward exits, searching for explanations. Rachel did all of it. One document became 5, 5 became 20, 20 became hundreds. Records, transfers, communications, timelines, patterns. Each piece by itself was troubling. Together they were devastating. Then came witness testimony. Susan testified. I thought she'd be terrified. Instead, she looked relieved, like someone finally putting down a burden they'd carried for years. She spoke clearly, carefully, and consistently. Every answer reinforced the same picture: planning, manipulation, coordination. The narrative my family had spent years selling was beginning to collapse. The courtroom felt different now, heavier, charged. Even the judge seemed increasingly disturbed. Then Denise introduced the emails. The room went silent. I will never forget that silence. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was worse. The kind of silence that appears when everyone realizes something important is happening. Something irreversible. Email after email appeared. Dates. Conversations. Strategies. Language that revealed intent. Language that exposed motives. Language that transformed concern into conspiracy. Rachel stopped making eye contact entirely. She stared at the table. My mother stared straight ahead. Neither looked at me. Neither looked at anyone. The mask was slipping, and they knew it. Then came the recording. The recording changed everything. The moment Denise announced it, I saw genuine fear appear on my mother's face for the first time in my life. Not anxiety, not concern. Fear. Real fear. The audio began playing. The room remained completely still. Every word felt heavier than the last. My mother's voice filled the courtroom. Clear, recognizable, undeniable. Discussing perception, discussing narrative control, discussing strategy. Not child welfare, not safety. Strategy. The recording wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. Sometimes a few minutes are enough to destroy years of lies. When it ended, the silence returned. Only this time, it felt different. Final. The kind of silence that follows a collapse. The judge called a recess shortly afterward. People stood. Whispers spread. Attorneys moved quickly between rooms. Court staff exchanged glances. Everything felt surreal. I walked into the hallway and leaned against the wall. My legs suddenly felt weak. Not because we were losing, because we weren't. For the first time, I knew we weren't. Denise approached. She rarely showed emotion. This time she smiled. Just slightly, but enough. They're done. 4 words. 7 years of pain condensed into 4 words. They're done. I closed my eyes, and for a second I thought about Emma. Not the legal battle, not the revenge. Emma, the little girl in the hospital, the toddler reaching for me, the child asking why I didn't live with her. Everything had always been about her. Everything. The hearing resumed. The second half was worse for my family than the first, because once people start realizing they've been lied to, they become much harder to fool. Contradictions emerged, statements conflicted, timelines fell apart. Excuses became increasingly desperate. The story no longer held together. Eventually, Rachel took the stand. I'll be honest, I expected anger, defiance, maybe even arrogance. Instead, I saw something unexpected: exhaustion. Years of deception had finally caught up to her. She looked tired, older, smaller somehow. The confident woman from social media was gone. In her place sat someone desperately trying to hold together a collapsing reality. Under questioning, she stumbled repeatedly. Small mistakes at first, then larger ones, then catastrophic ones. The worst moment came when Denise asked a simple question, a very simple question. When did you first begin discussing custody options? Rachel froze, just for a second. But a second was enough, because everyone knew. Everyone saw it. She wasn't searching for an answer. She was searching for a safe answer. And there wasn't one. Not anymore. The damage had already been done. The hearing concluded late that evening. The ruling wouldn't come immediately. But honestly, it didn't need to. The outcome was obvious. Everyone knew it, including them. The official decision arrived 3 weeks later. 3 weeks that felt endless. 3 weeks of anxiety. 3 weeks of waiting. 3 weeks of imagining every possible outcome. Then the call came. I answered immediately. Denise sounded happier than I'd ever heard her. "We won." That's all she said. "We won." I started crying instantly. Not graceful tears. Not movie tears. The ugly kind. The kind that comes from years of pressure finally breaking. The court found substantial evidence of misconduct. Evidence of manipulation. Evidence that critical elements of the original custody proceedings had been compromised. Custody orders were overturned. New proceedings established. Investigations expanded. Multiple professional reviews initiated. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Rachel's reputation disintegrated first. The same community that once praised her suddenly wanted answers. Questions spread quickly. Parents talked. Schools talked. Neighbors talked. People who once admired her began distancing themselves. Then came my mother, the woman who spent decades controlling narratives. Suddenly she couldn't control this one. Business relationships suffered. Friendships evaporated. People looked at her differently. Trust, once lost, rarely returns. Mark eventually left. Not immediately, but eventually. The pressure became too much. The secrets became too public. The consequences became too severe. Their perfect family image cracked apart, then shattered completely. But the most important moment wasn't legal. It wasn't public. It wasn't dramatic. It happened in a quiet room. Just me and Emma. The first real conversation we'd ever had about everything. She was 11, old enough to understand, young enough to still be hurt by it. I remember sitting across from her, terrified, more terrified than I'd been in court, because judges couldn't break my heart. Emma could. She looked so much older than the toddler I'd lost, but sometimes, in certain expressions, I still saw that little girl. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I'd feared for years. Did they lie? I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight. Yes. Emma stared at the floor, quiet, thinking, processing. A few minutes passed. Then she asked another. Were you trying to get me back the whole time? That question nearly destroyed me, because she sounded unsure. Like part of her genuinely didn't know. Like part of her wondered if I'd stopped fighting, if I'd given up, if I'd abandoned her. I felt tears forming immediately. Every day, my voice cracked. Every single day. Emma looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in years, I felt like she could see me, not the version she'd been told about, the real me. The silence stretched. Then she stood up, walked across the room, and hugged me. Just hugged me. No dramatic speech, no perfect movie moment, just a hug. And somehow that meant more than anything else. I cried into her shoulder. She cried too. Years of separation, years of lies, years of pain, all pouring out at once. Healing wasn't instant. It never is. Trust takes time. Relationships take time. Recovery takes time. But for the first time, we finally had a chance. A real chance. And that was enough. As for revenge, people often ask if it felt satisfying. The answer is complicated. Watching Rachel lose her reputation felt satisfying. Watching my mother's lies exposed felt satisfying. Watching truth finally win felt satisfying. But revenge wasn't the best part. The best part was this. They spent years convincing everyone I was unfit, unstable, broken, weak. They underestimated me completely. They thought if they isolated me long enough, I'd disappear. Instead, I became the one thing they never planned for: patient, determined, relentless, and ultimately unstoppable. Because the truth has a strange habit. You can bury it, hide it, manipulate it, delay it, But eventually, it starts pushing back. And when it finally reaches the surface, it tends to bring everything else down with it. It's been 3 years since that final ruling. Emma is 14 now. She's smart, funny, stubborn. Definitely my daughter. We're still rebuilding what was stolen from us. Some scars never fully disappear, but scars are proof of survival, not defeat. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd quit, if I'd accepted their version of reality, if I'd stopped fighting. The answer is simple. They would have won. And that's why I tell this story. Because sometimes justice takes months, sometimes years, sometimes nearly a decade. But if the truth is on your side, don't give up too soon. The people who wronged you are often counting on exactly that. They're counting on exhaustion. They're counting on despair. They're counting on silence. Don't give them any of it. If you enjoyed this story and believe some betrayals deserve consequences, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. What was the worst betrayal in this story? The sister, the mother, or the years of lies that followed? And remember, the most dangerous person isn't someone seeking revenge. It's someone who quietly spends years collecting the truth. Until next time.